Not really. Not really. Yeah, not really.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. All right, so I'm Denisha Baker Whitaker, the archivist at Holgate Library, and I just would like to welcome you all to the second half of the Interdisciplinary Research Day program. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We had a very informative and interesting session number 1, and this second session promises to be just as engaging, so I look forward to it along with you all as well. I really want to go over just a couple of the general rules or kind of what to expect. So we have what you can do is do a scan of the program. We have an interactive program, paperless program for you guys, so you should be able to take a scan of that and follow along to see how our sessions are going to proceed. Basically, we will have speakers, oral presenters, and they will have 10 minutes to share their research with you, followed by a 5-minute question and answer period. And also because of that setup, we're asking that you would, if you need to take a break or to go out, that you would wait to that change, to that transition time between presenters to move about so that they can maintain just the atmosphere of their presentation. I would like to invite you, so towards the end, we'll proceed from 2 o'clock until 3:30. At 3 o'clock, we have the keynote speaker, Ms. Vinita Embry, will come and share along with us. But after that, I want to invite everyone to participate in the IRD Awards and also special presentations at the Wilbur Steele Hall Art Gallery, and that'll be from 4 o'clock to 5 o'clock. So, in just recognition of the collaborative nature of most research activity, whether it's the researcher working with a library or an archives, a researcher working with a colleague, or student working with faculty, I just want to encourage the students and our student presenters to also be appreciative of their faculty mentors. And along that line, I would like to bring Dr. Bookman up, and she will talk about the role of faculty mentorship with us.
Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to see so many of you here. Did I do that? What in the world? I put my hands up here on the on this. Okay, we're good. Again, it's so nice to see so many of you here. My piece is going to be very, very short. I don't think I really need to talk to those of you here. It's like talking to the choir. I think your very presence indicates the value that you understand is a result of faculty and students collaborating in this very important endeavor called research. I want to speak of it from my own personal experience as a faculty mentor, and I want to not only tell you how, as a student, it advances you in terms of not only your experience while you're here on campus, but it also is a value to you as you make your next steps from Bennett out in either the work world or as you go out for further graduate work. It's really important while you're here at Bennett to not only do well academically, i.e. in the individual classes that you take. It's extremely important for you to get those extra experiences, which includes things like relationships with your faculty in a very personal and up-close way, which certainly does happen through research, it's very important for you to not only have the experience, but then to share it, as we're doing today here at Bennett, as well as going with your faculty members to professional settings to have another opportunity to present. It's a wonderful addition to your resume, first of all, and it also gives your faculty member something very concrete to say about you in those so important letters of recommendation. It's a very different letter when your faculty member not only writes that you got a good grade in the class, but that you actually worked with that faculty member in this intellectual engagement of doing research. The last thing that I want to say is to reflect on my own experience as a faculty mentor, especially this year. Very often, the mentoring, and I use that word with quotation marks, not only flows from the faculty member who shares his or her expertise with the student, it also flows from the student to the faculty member, particularly when you are engaged in research that is of interest to you that may not be an area that your faculty member is as exposed to. And my personal example was my work this semester with a student on a project that we're engaged in here at Bennett on modern-day slavery. My particular research assistant exposed me through her own endeavors to something called fashion. Its involvement with modern-day slavery has to do with those of us in the West, because we want cheap clothes and we want fast fashion, we are helping to lead to very enslavement situations for many female workers and children workers in other parts of the globe who are making those clothes under circumstances that are much less desirable than what we would expect to work under here in the United States. So I was very intrigued by her research and was very informed myself as I worked with her to identify sources, to identify DVDs, and to really look at what is the impact of fast fashion on our global relationship with others in particularly the third world. The other thing that I wanted to share with you that was also fascinating for me to learn through this research with her is the impact of polyester as a fabric for the fast fashion industry, and the fact that polyester takes years and years to disintegrate. I think in looking at it, it may be some that have been around for 200 years that are still in those landfills. So what we were able to do in our research together was to not only look at the impact of her innovative topic to modern-day slavery, but also to look at its impact on the environment as well. So my whole point is to, first of all, applaud those of you who are doing research, but to also encourage those of you who have not yet sought that to make it part of your experience while you are here at Bennett. And as I've indicated, it will be not only a benefit to you, but very often it will be a benefit to your faculty mentor, who will have an opportunity to learn about a new subject through the research that you're doing. So again, I extend welcome to you, and I applaud all of you who have already made that step to start your relationship with your faculty members.
So again, I will mention how honored I am to be participating in this type of an event. Certainly as a librarian, as an archivist, this supporting researchers is something that's at the core of the service that I performed in my professionalism. But also, I also want to take a moment just to acknowledge the other staff at Holgate Library. So Joan Williams, our library director, and Mrs. Julia Scott, our circulation librarian, are all very involved in supporting the students. And I would like to mention that we are coming up on our 80th anniversary. So it's been 80 years of Holgate Library supporting the Bennett College campus. And I can't think of a better birthday present for the library and for the campus than this production that you are about to see that details some of the aspects of our renovation. And I don't know how to get to it.
You can take it down. There you go.
Hi, I'm Ayana Marson, a freshman at college. I'm also a work-study student here at the Holgate Library. I know you're probably wondering, what's going on with all the construction inside of the library? I'm wondering too. So what we're going to do is, we're going to sneak upstairs and we're going to see what's going on. Wow. Cool. So follow me. You can already see that they've moved a lot of the shelving so the students have more space. Over here, we have new furniture, new chairs, bougie chairs for lounging purposes. You can lay here, study with your friends. Also, we have the new computer stations. And we also have this table here. And what's cool about this is as you look on the back of the chairs, you can see the Bennett emblem. And what's cool about this over here is you can sit here and study with a group of your friends and have a little privacy. All right, I'm gonna try one of these big chairs. It's pretty comfy. As I walk across this new carpet past the front desk, this room used to be full of stacks of books. But now it's been opened up into a more broader space for students to come and maybe study with their friends in the green chairs. Or perhaps take the lesson outside of the classroom and bring it to the library in the conference style chairs. My favorite part, I love coffee. The new library features a coffee station that's going to have hot tea, hot chocolate, coffee, and all the fixins, including the cup, for only 75 cents. As we walk through these new doors to go to the other side, I want to show you something. Over here at the green study stations, when you press this little gray box, it opens charging ports, including a USB port for your phone so you can charge while you're studying. Look at all these cool study stations. Some more private, some more open, and as you can tell by my choice of nail color, I'll be sitting at the green stations. Oh wow, look over here, they have new rooms. They've built new study rooms enclosed in glass, and over here in these big boxes are HD touch monitors that are going to be placed inside these rooms and cover the walls. Look at this one over here. It's not a ghost, but the lights just turned themselves on. This is also another great place where you can have a lesson or have a large study session. As you can see from my tour, our library director, Miss Williams, and her team have done an amazing job making this into a state-of-the-art facility. Next year, you can come here and do your best research. Look at your research now and compare it to what it could be next year at the Holgate Library. And right now, I want to invite you to our grand opening. Make sure you come up and show out and see all the things that our library has in store. And please don't tell Miss Williams I snuck up here.
Baker Whitaker, but she's called work that we do with North and Coast Quarters now. The new library opens up soon. The grand opening celebration before the meeting. Let's thank her. Okay.
So without any further ado, we're going to get into the remainder of our program for our session, and we are leading with Dr. Paul McGee, speaking to us about identity, gender, race.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all are well. My name is Carla McLucas. I am a sociologist on campus. I also work for the Office of Institutional Effectiveness. So if you want to know anything about testing, talk to me. But I started off at Bennett back in 2006 as a full-time sociology professor, and I stayed in that position until 2016. Prior to coming to Bennett, I worked in a various number of industries. I was a political appointee in the state of Missouri. I was a lawyer. I was a city planner. And all those aspects of my job and positions, I had to conduct research. So when I came to Bennett, one of the reasons I was hired is because they said, "Do you do research?" I said, "Yes." "Do you do statistics?" I said, "Yes." And so I conducted or taught statistics and research. The other thing that happened is that when I came here, the then provost said that one of the things to do to help you with your teaching is to continue research, but continue doing faculty development courses in terms of research and teaching and the scholarship of teaching. So I did that too, and this, what I'm going to present, is work that I did for, in January at the University of Sacred Heart in Puerto Rico about women's activism in the Americas. I was selected to go to this winter session of NYU. We are a member of New York University's Faculty Resource Network, the school is. And we applied to go to the summer session, the winter session, and also the semester. So I have spent time at NYU for the summer and then week-long sessions. The facilitator of this session is one of my mentors, Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheptall, who is the Anna Julia Cooper Professor of Women's Studies in English at Spelman, and she's also, more importantly, director of the Women's Research and Resource Center at Spelman. And she's the founding director and started that in 1981. And that was important because it brought to light, or it helped younger generations and continuing generations of young women scholars to look at how you align your research and practice. And she's one of the most recognizable and highly and prominent women studies activist and practitioner and researcher, and also one of my mentors. I followed her. I first met Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheptall in Atlanta in January 2007, and then she was a facilitator for a program in Accra, Ghana, in Brazil, and then Puerto Rico, and also during the summers at NYU. So the purpose of this winter program was for us, or the participants, to look at women's activism and try to incorporate, or not try, but to incorporate some of the readings and concepts into a class or a module or a section of your course. So I developed a module or component for the fall 2019 semester. And what I'm doing is I plan to introduce students to the concept of the sociological concept of intersectionality, race, gender, class, ability, disability, geography, because I'm also a geographer. And when we purchase the Geographic Information System software again, I'll be teaching that. But I want students to understand that you can align your scholarship, your understanding, or the beginning understanding of research with theory and practice. They are entwined. They are not separate and opposing. So with this course, or with this module, I'm going to look at the lens of intersectionality through one of the readers, because intersectionality is not linear. It's like a spider web, according to Anna Lassen. It goes out in tentacles. They're aligned. They're not aligned, but they're woven together in different ways. Your identity. I talked to some of the students today, who they were as fresh women, what they thought their identities were, and they thought, of course, at 16, 17, they were fixed in stone. They have changed. They have evolved. They have merged. I also want students to understand about what is radical feminism, and looking at gender norms and scripts, because for most of them, you might think that it's binary gender, but it's not necessarily always so. And then I want to talk about, besides multiple identities, I want to talk about two things: economic and social justice, and food security, insecurity. Because one of the things that our students, some of my students, look at or discuss or not clear on is how what you eat, where your food is grown, how you get to it, what you eat, how it affects your health and well-being, and what happens when you have food insecurity. Does that mean you don't eat today? Does that mean you're on a fast? Does that mean you don't only have one meal? Does that mean that you are in college and you're food insecure because the food is not what you can eat, or you can't access food? So I'm setting up a group assignments. In my introduction to sociology class, I always do, yeah, she's making that face. Okay, Miss Miles, I always do group assignments, but here we're going to, in the fall, we're going to read some selective readings from the list that we have and others about women who pursuing economic and social justice. And we're going to look at various economic sectors: agriculture, business, education, international relations, and politics. And then, of course, because we always use rubrics, the students will have a rubric that will tell them how they are going to be assessed on their group presentation and their group paper. And this is to help them integrate the theory and practice, because they're also going to develop a service learning component from this course. Research, and I have my sociology teaching sociology pamphlet or bulletin that I get, a journal that I get every 2 months. And one of the things is that for students to understand what they learn in any discipline, it becomes more real when there's a service learning component attached to it, to most courses. So I'm wanting our students to develop a service learning component that they can take to SGA or any of their organizations and say, can we integrate? Because if we think about, right now we're doing a service learning component with NAACP, we're doing letters to sisters. They're writing letters for sisters, young women who are detained in the Guilford County Detention Center. And that came out of a community service or a conversation about students or young women who are detained and who gets to talk with them and what do they see. And from those conversations and discussion, we started the Letters to Sisters Community Service Program last year, and we're doing it again this year. So I'm looking at a couple of examples, and I want students to look at past and present. So if we're looking at agriculture and food security, one of the things that some students know about Fannie Lou Hamer. Well, what is it about Fannie Lou Hamer? And people say, well, I've seen the iconic poster, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. But Fannie Lou Hamer started off as She grew up in Mississippi, born in Mississippi, farmed in Mississippi, became very active in politics, but she wanted to look at not just farming, but how farming and agriculture can change a person's life. You don't have to be a sharecropper all the time. You don't have to own all the land, but you can be taught and worked the land in a way that's sustainable. Then we are going to, and I'm looking at past and present because I wanted students to look at Lori Clevenger. Lori Clevenger is a multiracial woman, black father, white mother, born in Kansas City, and really thought she wanted to get away from her mother's family, which were farmers. But as she grew up, she had some health challenges. And one of the things is that her mother was told that she had to have a different diet. And her diet was much more organic type of food. And she's like, well, you know, if my mother's family didn't have access to wealth, if I had been raised by my black father's family, we may not have been able to attain that food, to have that healthy diet. So one of the things she did was talk about or work in sustainable farming. So I want some of our students will look at her life and look to see how can you connect to the land and what does it mean to grow organic / sustainable food. What are the food systems like? So that's agriculture. And then I'm talking about education and radical feminism. People used to, until 2016, if you had a passport, the last quote was a quote from Anna Julia Cooper. Some of you know some students who were Anna Julia Cooper fellows at Wake Forest. And two of the mentors, Dr. Gibson and Dr. Campbell were mentors for some of those fellows. And I thought there was a student here who was, there's one. Why are you hiding? Miss Patterson was one of the fellows. But anyway, we want to talk about what Anna Julia Cooper talked about and how did she live her life in terms of the pursuit of economic and social justice. And one of the things we also want to talk about is that Anna Julia Cooper, even though she was a teacher and was degreed and certified, went to Sorbonne at the age of 63, and earned her PhD. Now, think about this. This is at the beginning of this century, so her classes were taught in French. She had to respond to all of her coursework in French, and she earns her PhD at 67. And she didn't fly to France. She had to take that boat. Anyway, issue about internationalism, how our students should think about global studies, how our students should think about acquiring the skill set of a second language. Then some students will contrast Anna Julia Cooper's work with bell hooks work in terms of education. And the other thing that we want students to understand, or I want students to understand, is that the whole idea of radical feminism is not centered with only women of color. That is international. That it crosses races and ethnicity. And you have to understand the linkages between and among radical women. We're going to look at politics and radical feminism. How many of you all know that Ketchy, this building, was named after what was her name? How many have gone down to the archives and look at some of our wonderful radical women? Rose Ketchy graduated from Bennett, earned her master's, was considered, according to the FBI, as a radical, as potential to work with quote-unquote communist party. But all she was doing was looking at how young women archives. But she also, based on the fact that she's married to a minister who was doing work in international work, they traveled to China and other places, and she taught in those areas. So she conducted research and also taught. Students need to know about her. So I have to finish because I've got that look. Some of my resources. But I think it's very important, and this is one thing that we've learned here at Bennett. When we go and we gather information, we need to bring it back and provide it to our students so they understand the interaction, the alignment between theory, research, and practice. That it is part and parcel of becoming a scholar, that anyone can do it. It's not just for individuals who say, I'm going to grad school. And it is very important for students to understand the global international linkages of research, teaching, in the pursuit of social and economic justice. So I want to thank FNU, my colleagues here, my students who keep pushing, and others. Thank you. Questions? No, we're moving slow. We need to get out of here. Okay.
Okay, let's give a round of applause for Professor Jeffries is coming up. I want to remind you Ms. Baker-Whitaker was talking about the reception that's for guests and presenters. There'll be a bunch of food there. So make sure that if that helps it to become more attractive, make sure you come there, and there'll be awards presented, and it'll be pretty cool.
This is a prime example of that. So those of you sitting here, some of you know me as the journalism and media studies professor, and some of you know me as the yoga teacher. And some of you may know that my background is in writing and being an editor around health and wellness, and particularly for African American women. And so what I have found over the course of that sort of multifarious career is that all these things can go together, and this is a presentation that is an example of that. As part of the work that we are doing that you may have heard about here, that Dr. Campbell and I are doing, that evolved out of the simple decision to present, to have yoga on campus. We are doing some research around the impact of having yoga on campus on Black women's health. And in the course of doing that work, we read a lot of things and look at a lot of things, and what came to my awareness was that Alice Coltrane was a yogi. So first of all, how many people know who Alice Coltrane is? A whole two people. A whole two people. Alice Coltrane is the, how many people know who John Coltrane is? Okay, there we go. Looks like five. So John Coltrane is, you should know him. He was probably the best known name in terms of jazz music. And he was born here in North Carolina. lived mostly away, but born here in North Carolina. And Alice Coltrane was his wife. So I want to talk about her today, not as his wife, but as the person that she evolved to be, and how that person connects with the concept of Afrofuturism. So the idea here is, I'm sure you can't read all of that, that she was a musician in her own right, very brilliant musician in her own right before she ever met him. And they came together in a musical partnership, but they also came together in a spiritual partnership as well. And her journey after he died was to continue to go much further along in that spiritual direction. But the theory here is that what she was doing became a form of Afrofuturism. So the first thing is like, what is Afrofuturism? So we think of this a lot of times in terms of how it manifests for us here today is in some of our music and culture. We think of it in terms of science fiction and what have you. So the definition, though, or at least one definition, is that Afrofuturism blends the African diaspora with science, technology, philosophy. Afrofuturism, a way for Black people to see and expand on new ideas and shape a future of our own. Afrofuturism aims to reclaim Black history by imagining an alternate future, one that incorporates science fiction, technology, and African and Black mythology. So Afrofuturists celebrate ancient cultures and traditions. There's very much of a celebration of Blackness. They envision a future that includes Black culture, and Black culture in a positive way. And part of that work is to also create an alternate narrative to the way that we tend to think and talk about Black people in America. When you say, well, what is Black culture and Black history, then you think about the enslaved people, you think about Jim Crow, you think about the struggles during civil rights, you come to the present day and you're talking about Black Lives Matter. All of those things are struggles. And in some cases, the Afrofuturists are looking at what is a different way of thinking, what is maybe a more positive or more empowered way of thinking about the Black experience. And so tapping into those, that power, and oftentimes using creativity as the source of that power. So when you think of Afrofuturists, you may think of the writers of science fiction stories. If you're a reader, Octavia Butler comes to mind immediately. You also have now Tomi Adeyemi and a number of other people who are writing speculative fiction, science fiction. You can also think of it in terms of, if you go back a little ways, you got to maybe your parents or even grandparents times. You're talking about musicians such as Sun Ra and George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic, and they had the imagery in their music of one of the things is the mothership. And if you've been to the Smithsonian Museum of African American History and Culture, you see there's the mothership. And so they talk about this space age kind of idea that really kind of goes back to the notion, this traditional African American spiritual notion that we are going to be lifted out of this struggle and taken to a better place. And so that is something that they do in their music. And so you see that coming forward now today to some of the imagery that you would see with Janelle Monáe, for example, even Solange, anybody that's going to show up at that Afrofest festival. And those are environments that are created. And so including in here alternate environments like Wakanda is one of those is one of those fictional alternate environments where we are centered and where we're empowered as Black people. Greg Tate, going the wrong way, cultural critic, says that anybody who has a vision that Black people's stories and presence and images could be told and elevated could be considered an Afrofuturist. And so under his definition, Sojourner Truth and Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King and all those people who were advancing and looking for ways for Black folks to live a different and better life would be considered Afrofuturists. These are folks who are going outside the norm. And so if you look at pictures, I should have included some, if you go and Google pictures of the Afropunk Fest, these are people who look very alternative and maybe have some alternative lifestyles and what have you. But whether, if somebody is sort of quiet and traditional as the Martin Luther King or what have you, or somebody who's got, green hair and a bunch of piercings, these are people who are willing to be a little bit outside the norm, intentionally. So one of these people is Alice Coltrane, and you see here her other name, and we'll talk about how she gets to that, Swamini Turiya Sangitananda. It took me like a month to learn how to say that one. That she is also, this argument of this presentation is that she is also somebody who would be considered Afrofuturist. She used music and her spirituality as forms of technology, and technology is a big part of Afrofuturism. She blended ancient cultures and traditions, or ancient traditions across cultures, so she melded different cultures, and she used the power of her talents and her creativity and her spiritual work as a method of healing and empowerment for folks. So just a little bit about her background. She, as I said, was a talent and genius in herself. At the age of 9, she was playing piano. She was a musician for churches in her home in Detroit, and continued as through her teenage years to perform with, and at the time, she was born in 1937, by the time she got to be a teenager, the music scene in Detroit was very strong, and her ability to play was strong enough that she was playing with some of the best musicians there. That took her out of Detroit, took her to Europe for a while, and then back to the United States. And that's when she was performing with a quartet that opened for John Coltrane, and that's how she met John Coltrane in 1963. And so that became this union. They had this sort of instant and very indelible and very strong connection right away. She left, quote unquote, left music to be a wife and mother, intentionally to be supportive of him, but she never stopped playing. They were musicians together, so their home life was steeped in music. And they had 3 children together, and the children were steeped in music. And she eventually joined as he continued to play, she eventually joined his quartet as his pianist. So in addition to their study of music together, they were also spiritual partners. John had already started to do some study in Eastern religions, Hinduism and Buddhism and other religions, and do some meditation, and had come to a philosophy of his own that there was a oneness, that there was a connection between among all of these different religions. And because he was this musical genius, he also was seeing music as a language, and then the language of music became the way that he thought that they should communicate what they had learned about this spiritual philosophy. So there again, we think of technology as the bells and the whistles and the computers and the phones and what have you. But there are other things that would be considered technology. And I'll tell you the definition. One definition is technology, the application of scientific knowledge to the practical aims of human life, or as it's sometimes phrased, to the change and manipulation of the human environment. So if we think about that very broadly, then anything that we can do that advances our lives can be thought of as a technology. So the reason that I even started to think about Alice Coltrane, because I was thinking about her as a yoga person, but the reason that I started thinking about her in the context of Afrofuturism is because of an experience that she had after John Coltrane died. As I said, they got together in 1963. He died of liver cancer in 1967, so they were together for a very short period of time. And after he died, she continued to play for a while, but she went into this really intense spiritual experience that, when I describe it to you, is going to sound like something that you would see in a science fiction movie. She was probably as a form of healing. She continued to do the prayer and the meditation and the things that they were doing together. But then she says she received a calling. She heard a voice, and the voice asked her, the voice was God, and asked her to, was she willing to do whatever God said do? And she said that she was. And so she began to get these messages and have these experiences that included, she isolated herself to the extent that she wasn't taking care of her young children at the time. Her sisters and family members and what she called astral nurses were taking care of her children. She wasn't sleeping. She wasn't eating. She went from 125 pounds to 95 pounds. She didn't drive. She wasn't doing music, just really completely isolated and going into hours and hours and hours of meditation. She describes it this way. Her heart would stop several times a day. Sometimes my heartbeat shifted to the right side of my body. All the hair on my head would sometimes stand on end, and as if it were electrically charged. She described radiations, cosmic sounds, astral explosions, earthquakes, subterranean shocks, and etheric sirens. I was even taken to the nether regions of the afterlife. And so she was also at this time getting voices of telling her things to do. So she was told to take steps into the abyss. And so she went to step into the abyss, and there was no abyss. She was told to throw herself out of a window, and she went to the window. The window was sealed. She was told to burn her, to hold her hand over a flame, which she did. And you will see pictures later of her hand, and you can see the burns that were there. So the description of this, I see facial expressions. This description sounds like psychosis if we were to look at a definition of that. And probably we would look at that now and say, well, she was, having a mental health crisis because of her grief. But she considered it a process called tapasya. It's a Sanskrit term. So those of you who've taken yoga have heard me say tapas. That means heat. That means that we're working up a sweat. This is a different thing. Tapasya was a very specific process of deliberate austerity and asceticism, that fasting, that retreat from things. She considered this suffering as a form of tempering, as a form of preparation for what was about to come for her. And that this was something that was going to help her become stronger for whatever it was she was called to do next. And she was called to do some things next. Interestingly, it was after this that she actually got connected with the yoga community, and sort of in direct contact with Hindu spiritual traditions. It was one of John's musician friends, one of their musician friends, who saw that she was having these issues, and he took her to meet the gentleman in the picture up there, Swami Satchidananda. This was 1960, right after John died, 1966, 67. And Sivananda had come to the United States, as other Indian gurus had over the years, to spread the gospel of yoga in the West. And the musician friend Vishnu Wood took Alice Coltrane to meet him, thinking that he would be able to help her and soothe her grief and what have you. She became very close with Satchidananda to the point that she was a follower of his. She went with him back to India several different times, studying, touring, learning music, learning the tradition. And when she returned from the first time in India, she took on a new spiritual name, which was at that time just Turiya, and moved to Northern California. They had lived in Philadelphia, and she was traveling between Philly and New York. And she formed a Vedantic center, which was a center for the study of the Vedas, which are the ancient Hindu scriptures. And eventually, she also formed an ashram, a community, bought property in California, almost 50 acres of land, and created an ashram. It's clear from her, if you read her own work and transcripts of interviews, that she, as steeped as she was in the Hindu tradition, she did not ever get rid of or eschew the Christian tradition in which she was raised. And in almost 10 years after that Tapasya experience in 1976, she was called again by God, and this time to be the leader of this ashramic space. She was not ordained by Satchidananda or any other person. She considers herself called by God, and that is along the traditions of other Black women who have been called to spiritual work. And so, as an Afrofuturist, as I said, they claim spaces for themselves and like-minded people. By this time, she had taken on an additional name, and it was Turiya Sangeetananda, and she really delved into being the leader of the Vedantic Center, studying the text, and creating a space for other people to come and also do this study. In addition to being a place of study, this was a center for service. They provided services. They worked with homeless shelters. They worked in the area where they were in California. They were neighbors with a Native American community, so they did collaborative work with the Native American community. And their weekly process involved people coming to satsangs, which are community gatherings, and to study and to hear her teach. And the teaching that she did was very much centered around her music. And so what you will hear is, when you're listening to some of the music that she produced then, is you can hear the gospel tradition, you can hear the jazz tradition, and you can hear the Hindu tradition blending together. So she, again, acknowledged her history, but also incorporated other cultures as well. She was central to the ashram for 30 years until she died in 2007. And then her followers continued to go. They enshrined her. There's a film that I have to let you see, Dr. Campbell, where there's a picture of her. They have put up a picture of her and created an altar, and they would continue to go play the songs that she had developed and adapted, and not worship her, but honor her, again, the way that you will see African and African American folks, some of us create ancestor altars and what have you. So there's a connection between the African and the Eastern too. She is an example also of using her and cultivating and embodying a creative energy for good and for, in this case, the purpose of healing. And she used her music as a form of communicating with people, continuing what John thought that music could be and do, using that to convey spiritual messages, creating chants, instrumental music, and again, blended through these different kinds of cultures. But she, even before, and we know now that there are studies that talk about the healing power of music, but she believed that before. She said that in India there's a name of God known as Nada Brahma. It means God is sound. God is sound. She said in an interview back in 2000, the article was written in 2009. If she could expose people to the sound of God by wrapping them in it through her voice and her instruments, she believed that they could be healed. Sharing music with her followers became the focus of her musicianship. And she not only believed that they could be healed, but they believed that they could be healed. And so there is one of her biographers documents more than 20 narratives of people who came to her with everything from back pain to accident injuries, infertility, cancer, other physical ailments. The healing process included prayer, the recitation of chants, and the laying on of hands. And so they tell stories of her touching an area of their body and it being healed, or even looking at an area of her body, an area of a body. If they said that they had an illness in the knee, she could look at the knee and heal them. Through Swamini's interventions, many injuries which individuals had endured for years were often healed in a moment, according to one of her biographers. And this was as a result of the development and cultivation of her spirituality. And so, ending, she, as you look at her life, she is an example of somebody who was seemingly quietly but consistently breaking the rules, even from childhood and young adulthood. I mentioned that she went to Europe. She left her family and got married and went to Europe. And then she divorced her husband that she married and went to Europe with, and came back as a single mother in the 50s, which was not something that was expected. She traveled in these circles of these musicians and was oftentimes only one of the only, if not the only woman in those groups. Even though she was involved with and influenced by very powerful men, including John and Satchidananda and another well-known guru, she acknowledged them, but she was also clear that they did not dictate what it was that she did. So she had an audacity as a black woman to also put herself in a position of spiritual leadership. And what we know even today is that often in our churches and in our spiritual places, women are not welcome as leaders. And so she took on that. So she never shied away from her calling or the power of her responsibility. And she did that without seeking permission from anyone but God. She was very clear of that. There was a recent television report on CBS, Good Morning America, I believe it was. And the reporter, Alex Wagner, said, in some ways, Afrofuturism is a revolutionary act. And if we think of that, Alice Coltrane Turiya Sangeetananda was a revolutionary. She claimed spaces and created conditions under which black people could practice breathing, self-care, and simply being themselves in a safe place. She made a space for worship in a context that was not traditionally black, but she made it black through her presence and by opening it up to other black people and bringing blackness to it through her music and her experience as a black woman in America. her ultimate aim was to bring peace and enlightenment to the people that she came in contact with. And she embraced and centered Black people in that role. And so if Afrofuturism is the ability to see and provide a positive future for African American, and Black people, then Alice Coltrane, Turi Asange Tananda, was decidedly Afrofuturist. Thank you. Any questions? Yes, ma'am. Well, Dr. Campbell, as a matter of fact, I do. We were invited, this is a shameless plug, we were invited to contribute to a volume around Black women in public health. And the chapter that we worked on and that has been accepted and will be published next year focuses on and gives a little bit more information about Alice Coltrane and more about her work and the healing work that she did. Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that's an interesting thing, and I presented on this at UNCG. They had an Afrofuturism conference last month, February, and that was one of the questions that came up. And what happened in this case, obviously, is that rather than have her be institutionalized, her community wrapped around her, her family and her community. Like I said, her sisters and the community neighbors took care of her children. Her children would have been 5, 6, 7 at the time. She had 4. And they took care of her. Now, she did go to the hospital when she did the burn. She went to the hospital, but we're also talking about the late 60s. And so the hospital they took her to didn't take her. They sent her to a county hospital. And so you're still dealing with, race issues and that kind of thing. And so people just wrapped themselves around her and let her go through her thing until Vishnu was like, okay, that's about enough of that. And then took her to a guru as a way of, didn't take her to the hospital, took her somewhere else as a way to help her heal. Mm-hmm. Other questions? Thank you much.
Before we call up Destiny Collins, our keynote speaker, Vinita Embry, is in the house now. She snuck in. Could you stand up, Vinita? And we're going to be hearing a little bit more about her research before she gets a chance to do her keynote speech. And Constance Saley will be introducing her after the next 2 presentations. And Destiny now is ready to give you on sexual assault.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Destiny Collins. I am a journalism and media studies major from Tarboro, North Carolina, and I will be coming forth to you about sexual abuse inside the predator's mind. Now, since the beginning of 2019, we heard a lot of coverage about our famous celebrity predators that was shocking to all, or some of us already knew, about R. Kelly and Michael Jackson. And I wanted to shed light on the issue because once you see them on media, especially on social media and Twitter, you know, they're bashed heavily and they're called monsters. They're just disgusting individuals. No one wants to deal with them. No one wants to talk to them. Constantly, R. Kelly is being bashed every day, and he's still being bashed on the internet as we speak, as well as Michael Jackson as well. And, you know, the infamous R. Kelly interview that we had like last month that was going around about his accusations of sexual assault and everything else. And I wanted to talk about, even though we do consider them as monsters and evil people, we really want to know, like, what is it? Like, why are they the way that they are? What happened to them that made them become predators? And how can we not necessarily feel sorry for them, but actually understand them? And before we get into that, I want to give you guys a definition of what is sexual assault. It's an undesirable sexual behavior by one person upon another, and there's different varieties of sexual assault or abuse: rape, molestation, drug facilitated sexual assault, date rape, drugs, stalking, groping, and incest, child sexual abuse. Also, I remember I was telling my friend about a time that we all went to the club and another one of my friends got groped in the club. And she didn't really understand like that was sexual assault. And she told me about her incident, my other friend. She also told me about her incident when she was always groped in the club and they didn't really realize that that was sexual assault. Yes, ladies, if a man does touch you without your permission, all upon you, that is sexual assault. I just wanted to say that little part. And study shows that there are 3 types of predators in this world: sexual assault predators, manipulative, opportunist, and coercive. Coercive means very demanding, controlling. They will abuse you, like physically. Manipulative is mainly child molesters, like they can really get into the person's mind, especially easily as a child. If you are a child, it's very easy for you to be manipulated, especially by an adult. They'll confuse all of that. Coercive is rapist, and if you are an opportunist, that is both rapists and child molesters. Like I said, today we are talking about what goes on inside the predator's mind. And for one thing that I learned from my studies is that when a person does do the child molestation or sexual assault, it's because they already been sexually abused while they were younger, and it really kind of stuck to their minds like, oh wow, I could really like do this, you know. I don't see why not. Some people can really say, I don't want to be abused anymore, while others go into the other route and choose to abuse others. And the reason why they do that, because it feels familiar. Rapists find common ground with sexual abuse. What I mean by that is that they realize that I can't take that back. Whatever happened to me is done. What I'm going to do is reciprocate that energy on to the other kids, and I want to see how they like that now. Sometimes it doesn't always have to be just genuine hatred towards the kids. Sometimes it's just, maybe that's how I felt, you know what I'm saying? Maybe I felt like that was love. When I was a child, I felt like that was love growing up. So I want to reciprocate that type of love and energy to my child, to the child who I'm, you know, giving sexual acts to. And they're, like I said, feelings are confused by love as well. They do this for healing purposes. Once they do this for child molesters do this for healing purposes. They relive their relationship with their abuser. Sometimes they want to find common ground with the person that abused them, and they want to talk it out and somehow kind of understand why they abused them. Some sexual assault some sexual predators, they usually talk to their abusers to understand, like, why did you do this to me? Was I not good enough, or did you really love me? And once they figure out the answer, they could portray that act upon the child the same way that the person did to them while they were younger. And that's the feeling that they could gain respect. They feel like they're in control. Our next slide, their attempt to gain control and power. It's a power move for them. They feel like, if I can do this to you, I can do this to anybody. No one can stop me. What brought to my attention was when you, have you guys ever watched the R. Kelly documentary? Anybody? I do recall that, he was molested by his sister when he was younger. And the kids that he raped while he was a musician in the 90s, they were easily influenced, very easily influenced early on. And they thought that it was just, they could get a record deal, or they could be anything else, like his girlfriend or some sort. And he would portray that on them and say, I do want you to be my girlfriend, or I could get you this singing career as long as you do one thing for me. And that turned into sexual assault and rape. And they didn't quite understand that when they were young, because they thought that they were going to get all that they wanted out of him if they just did that one favor. And it turned out that it wasn't the case. As well as Michael Jackson too. How many of you guys watched the Michael Jackson documentary? Okay. So for the person that did, you can tell that Michael Jackson, he would give candy out to these kids. He would invite them to Neverland. Try to persuade them with amusement parks. It was a part in the documentary they would send their families off to, like, Canada or to other great places with their family, while the child would be left behind with Michael Jackson. That way he can use tactics and manipulation upon the kids to get what he wants. I have videos today. The first video, two of the videos actually, is about the R. Kelly abuse. The first one is a little long, but I'm just going to cut to the chase. Actually, it's the second one who's a little longer. But the first one should be like at least a minute.
So vulnerable. I didn't want to believe that Robert was messing with Leah because she was so young.
Can you guys hear?
Robert was having sex with Aaliyah, a 15-year-old girl. Rob was the big star in Chicago at that time. He was all over the radio loved him. He had a lot of hit songs, and they were playing his songs. Chicago loved R. Kelly. There was Vibe, and he had another big hit, Honey Love. You have to know who R. Kelly was. He was larger than life. It was kind of like all of our hopes and dreams wrapped up into this artist. Teenage girls definitely wanted to meet him, and I had heard lots of stories about girls who did. This is really about an adult man who is using the power of his fame and wealth, whatever, to systematically degrade little black girls. When you get that type of Robert-like younger women, you have people who have fantasies about different things. I like older women. Go figure, But that's just a preference. It's a preference. Everyone has preferences.
With that video, that was his brother. His brother is in jail right now for, I think, burglary. But in the and the video that you just saw, it said that he had a preference to date younger women, and his brother had a preference of dating older women. Of course, you guys know that that's not a preference at all. And the other video that I had with R. Kelly, I can't be able to pull it up, but I'll explain it. His older brother, Bruce Kelly, I believe, they had an interview where they talked about the sexual abuse of their sister and how they would keep continuing on abusing them. And while the other brother was disgusted and I don't want anything to do with her, I just want her to leave us alone, R. Kelly seemed to gravitated to that, and he loved that. And even though I keep bringing up Michael Jackson as well, and I know some people do not agree with that, but it also makes you think about him as well. He also endured abuse, even though it may have not been sexual abuse. He endured some type of abuse from his family, and maybe that could have messed him up in life, and probably he wanted to reciprocate different energies of love and show gratitude through sex or molestation with the kids. And even though I'm not justifying it, but I do want to say that it gives you an insight on why they do what they do. And it's shocking, but it's very interesting. And if you guys have any questions, I would love to hear. Thank you as well. Any questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, and let's give a hand for Dr. Sharon, our final presenter of the day, faculty presenter of the day, before our keynote speech.
Do you have PowerPoint?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dr. Sheeran. I'm a chemistry faculty member here at Bennett College, and today I'm going to talk about some motivational factors that influence student engagement and academic success in STEM courses here at Bennett College. I also want to note that I am a research associate for the NSF-funded HBCU program titled What Works Well with STEM, and I want to introduce Kendra Mills to present her part on the mandatory tutoring component that she presented last semester in regards to STEM retention.
Good afternoon. I'm Kendra Mills, a junior biology major from Columbia, South Carolina, and like Dr. Sharon stated, I'll be doing the mandatory tutoring piece on this project. So this mic is in my face. Okay. So the purpose was to determine the impact of mandatory tutoring on 164 underrepresented minority female students in the STEM-related courses. The objective was to assess the participation rates of tutoring on midterm and final grades, as well as the students' overall GPAs during the fall 2016 semester. So what we did was students who had a midterm grade of D or below were identified by their instructor and then followed up with a referral letter by our department stating that they were required to go to mandatory tutoring. Out of those 164 students, 90 of those students who were enrolled in STEM courses were referred to mandatory tutoring. Each student was required to attend weekly sessions of those mandatory tutoring sessions. Those sessions were scheduled, managed, and done by online appointment scheduling software, Excel, and sign-in and sign-out sheets provided by the tutors for the students to sign each time they had a tutoring session. The data was collected, analyzed, and correlated with the students' midterm and final grades, as well as their overall GPAs. So the total number of students referred to tutoring was 90, and the total number of students tutored at least one time that wasn't specifically STEM and non-STEM was 73. The total number of STEM majors tutored at least one time was 57, and both the total number of non-STEM majors tutored at least one time and the total number of students tutored 3 or more times was 26. So here shows a comparison as far as GPAs that made up the total population of who was tutored more as far as GPAs. So the range from 2 to 2.9 made up the largest population of the students who attended the mandatory tutoring sessions. 73 students that were referred to mandatory tutoring attended at least one tutoring session during the academic semester. 57 students that attended tutoring at least one time were particularly STEM students. And both STEM and non-STEM majors with GPAs ranging from 2 to 2.9, like previously stated, did make up that largest population of the students that were tutored at least one time. So here shows a comparison between students' midterm grades and final grades for students who are particularly STEM majors that were tutored at least 3 or more times. You can see that students who had a midterm grade who weren't doing so well in the class were more likely to get F's and D's out of the courses before the mandatory tutoring was implemented. But as those students began to go to mandatory tutoring on a consistent basis, by the time that final grades were put in, students were more likely to get C's and A's out of the courses. And here shows another view of the students with the GPA ranges of 2 to 2.9 did make up the largest population of the students that participated in the mandatory tutoring sessions. And more than 50% of STEM students were successful in their STEM courses, with the exception of the students in Math 111A and Math 120 for particularly STEM majors. And for non-STEM majors, more than 50% of non-STEM students were successful in their STEM courses, with the exception of the courses of BI 101, Computer Science 170, and Math 120. We did find that there was a positive correlation between STEM students' participation in their tutoring sessions and the effect of their overall GPAs. Students with the overall GPA of less than 1.5 and greater than 3.5 were less likely to attend tutoring sessions, although poor performance was not a motivating factor for participating in the mandatory tutoring sessions. This study also proves that the more tutoring participation the student does, it can lead to the improvement of their final grades, which all in all improves the student's overall GPAs. Due to our limited number of students we were able to evaluate, because Bennett is a small institution, we would like to look at a larger population of students so we can get a more precise evaluation of students who have problems in classes. And we will talk about the student motivation in a moment, but we also want to look at perceived faculty support, the use of academic support services, and STEM GPA on participation of available tutoring services.
Thank you, Ms. Mills. All right, so I just want to give a little background about some data from the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics. And as you see, if you look at the red, this is a representation of, based on ethnicity and race, of those that pursue doctoral and actually obtain doctoral degrees in STEM-related fields. The white population is leading, followed by the Asian population. Black and Latino, we make up about 6 to 7% of those that actually obtain doctoral degrees in STEM-related fields. And this shows the number of female doctoral recipients categorized by ethnicity and race. And as you can see, the trend is pretty consistent from 2008 to 2012. The white population makes up the majority of those that obtain these terminal degrees in STEM fields, whereas Latino and African American, we make up roughly 6% to 7%. So the purpose of this research is to bridge the gap and to help students matriculate successfully in STEM-related fields so that they can go on to pursue doctoral degrees and help diversify the workforce. So our purpose is to evaluate the impact of 4 main interventions on GPAs, retention, and graduation rates of underrepresented minority students here at Bennett College. And we focus on these four categories: mandatory tutoring, supplemental instruction, faculty mentoring, and intrusive advising. Ms. Mills just gave a snippet of the mandatory tutoring component, and we want to, we have, as you see, this just shows, figure 8 shows student enrollment from 2015 to spring 2018. So we are increasing our student enrollment, but at the same time, our STEM enrollment has decreased from spring 2016 to 28%, from spring 2016, 28% to spring 2018 is dropped to 19%. So we want to increase the number of STEM majors, and we want to also retain those that we have. So again, African Americans and Latinos, we make up 6 to 7%, and it is our goal here at Bennett College to help students matriculate successfully by offering these services: tutoring, supplemental instructions, and mentoring. And based on the previous study, we conclude that student motivation, or their lack thereof, may play a vital role in their attainment of student success and academic achievement in STEM courses. So that's what we're going to focus on in the next phase of our research. We also understand that there are other factors that play a role in student success, not just academic but non-academic. And so we are focusing on motivation, but also students' attitudes play a role, the level of self-confidence, the degree to which students are willing to seek help when they need help, the degree to which students associate and feel connected with other students and also faculty members. And also there are a lot of personal factors that play a role in student success, like medical issues, transportation. There are students here that are mothers, so family obligations also play a role. But for the sake of this study, we're focusing on the motivation component. All right, and so the next person that you'll hear is Ms. Lucretia Whitfield. She'll come and introduce the next few slides.
Alrighty, so the purpose of our study currently, as we go into our second phase, is the motivational factor in the student engagement and academic success by analyzing data and the student surveys through midterm and final grades and GPAs in the STEM courses. Also, we would like to evaluate the faculty and instructional factors through the student engagement and academic success by analyzing the faculty and student interaction surveys. So we have two motivation factors that we will be looking at, and one of them is the learning oriented, and the performance oriented. Learning oriented is usually intrinsic, and it is developed by an individual who would like to develop learning academic success on their own, and is welcome to challenges and maintain striving after failure attempts. As the performance oriented is extrinsic, it's an external factor by other individuals that they would like to prove a point. Also, it's proven that they may not maintain effective strives after a failure attempts. So, which brings us to our hypothesis. We have a split hypothesis. We believe that the learning-oriented students will be more effective in academic achievement than the performance-oriented students, and we believe that the performance-oriented students may be more motivated to achieve better grades than the learning-oriented students. But overall, we have a positive correlations between those student motivation and academic success in the STEM courses. So, which brings us to our research questions. Which student group, performance-oriented or learning-oriented, have a higher achievement in STEM courses? And what motivation factors influence the performance-oriented and learning-oriented students? Which brings us to our next person.
Hi everyone, my name is Adea Williams. I'm a biology freshwoman from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I'll be presenting the next 3 slides. Okay, so as my colleague stated, the goal is student retention in STEM-related courses. So we asked ourselves a question. We asked ourselves, what motivational factors influence student engagement and academic achievement in STEM courses? And so we broke that question into 3 sections. And these are the sections that we want to research more. And the first one is by the STEM Student Course Engagement Survey. The second one is the midterm and final grade comparison of learning-oriented versus performance-oriented students. And the third one is STEM Faculty-Student Interaction Survey. Okay, after we did that, we want to ask ourselves 2 more questions. And those questions are, does learning and performance goal models determine students' perceptions of their classroom experiences? And the second one is, how does students' motivation and task choices, attitudes, and beliefs impact their ability to be successful in STEM courses? Okay, after that, we found that we need a target audience. So our target audience are the students enrolled in lower division gateway STEM courses. And that is the biology courses, the chemistry, the math, and computer science courses.
All right, so you all will be getting some surveys related to, for students, they will be getting student survey questions. And this is a snippet of what your questions will be comprised of. So we'll focus on not just these 3, but other categories. For example, attitude, am I Are you excited about attending your STEM courses? Are you having fun in your STEM courses? Are they interesting? Participation, are you always prepared when you attend your STEM courses? Do you participate actively in your STEM courses by asking questions? Goal orientations? Would you choose a good grade rather than being challenged? Do you strive harder to do better when perform poorly on an assignment? And these survey questions will go out in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to ask the faculty to make sure students fill out these surveys for us. And then faculty, you will get some surveys as well, and they'll focus on, so just a little snippet of what they may entail. In your class, does or did your student get started on his or her homework? Do they finish their work on time? Encouraging contact, do you encourage contact among your students from different backgrounds? Do you provide support for students overall? Are you providing support to help students succeed successfully? So all of these questions are provided by the NSSE, the National Survey of Student Engagement, Faculty Survey of Student Engagement, and ACT. So these aren't questions that we made up. These are questions that that are already in place. And again, we'll create our surveys using Qualtrics and distribute them to students participating in these courses and faculty members that are participating in these courses. And we will take our data, analyze it, and we will evaluate whether there's a correlation between the type of student motivation, learning-oriented or performance-oriented, and we will evaluate academic achievement based on midterm grades, final grades, and GPAs of participating students. And we will use R programming, which is a statistical program, and also Excel to analyze our data. And so overall, we want to focus on answering these questions. Is there a correlation between student motivation and grade averages in STEM courses? How does faculty instructional factors impact student engagement and academic success? And can we use these learning-oriented and performance-oriented models to understand what motivates students in STEM courses in our future studies? Also, how can we as faculty members adjust our instructional methods to enhance students' academic experience in STEM courses? And I will take questions at this time. Yes. Qualtrics, and I could email you a link, and you would use Qualtrics. It's going to be more, but it's going to be about 6 sections for students, and then we'll figure out as far as faculty student surveys, but it's going to be just about 10 to 15 minute survey for faculty, if you don't mind. Yeah. Anybody? Informed consent for the students? Will there be? Yes. Right. So, I was, Dr. Lisa, did you?
One of the things we'll be doing to inform faculty, we will announce it at the faculty senate. We also have a leading question, letting faculty know that this is a part of it. I do not know if we will see whether or not we will be able to get a gift card if we do not have enough participation gift cards. Now, we think that definitely is a gift card for that. So we don't have to go that's so far. So it's not
distance. Yeah. So it's still a small pool faculty. But
So I would announce that.
yeah. They know them. They saw the target audience. But target. So actually 1, 2, 3. No, but one teacher like teaches one-on-one.
So it's really important because this data will help inform like all of our studies on what we do, how we do it, how we do it, and what we really do, what we in the
Hello everyone. Once again, I'm Constance Staley, a senior chemistry major here at Bennett College, and I won't be before you long. I'm just here to introduce our wonderful keynote speaker. She is a wonderful researcher here. I'll just highlight, I won't insult your intelligence by reading her full bio, but if you scan the QR code on the outside of the door, you will have her bio in there within the program. But our lovely, phenomenal researcher here today, Miss Vinita Embry, she has obtained her Bachelor of Arts degree in Psychology from Northwestern University and a Master's in Public Health degree in Behavioral Sciences and Health Education from Emory University. And she is currently in her doctoral program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So we are very excited to hear her today in her presentation with us, and I'll just let you get started.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. This is actually my first time on campus. I'm very excited to hear about the research and meet some faces of professors and different areas. So this is the last few sessions I was able to catch. So I just was invited to talk about some research, and I consider myself kind of in transition. So for the past 10 years, I've worked in different types of behavioral health, public health research, a little bit of criminal justice research. And for the past 3 years, as Constance mentioned, I've been a doctoral student. And so kind of transitioning to more independent research. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my path, and that if this is helpful for you, or if you're undergrad, or for your students to think about their path. I'm always happy to talk to other people about kind of choosing your path. So the main thing I'm talking about will be kind of my research interests, my background that got me to this point, and then some tips for those who are interested in pursuing a career in research. So my first thing is I have a mentor now, and we're talking about things that I'm currently doing, and I asked, is there something else I should be doing to really establish myself? And she said, no, you're already a researcher, just keep doing the good work. And I feel really great about it, but I also really think about what is it to be not just a researcher, but a good researcher. So some of the qualities I think about when it comes to being a researcher is, being inquisitive, always thinking about the next question. So for every question you're answering, you should be asking 2 or 3 more questions. Being ethical, so the data you're collecting, the people you're involving into your research, making sure you're respecting them, that you're respecting their input, their backgrounds, and also you're thinking about how can you make the world better for everyone, as many people as possible, not just for yourself or your salary, your family. Methodical. So this is not necessarily tied to any particular type of method, not statistics, or if you're a quantitative person, but just really doing the work of working through the process of your research. And then kind of the other piece is just your personality, being confident. There's a lot of rejection that comes in research. So being ready to be able to put yourself out there in the peer review process, hearing no's, hearing you need to start back, but knowing that what you're doing is very important. And being humble that you're not going to solve all of the world's problems, that you can contribute something very important, but it's a small piece in a very big puzzle. And my last piece is that I like to be able to incorporate my personal experience and my background into the work I'm doing, but also mix it with the empirical research that's out there. I'm learning from the last presentation about learning-oriented, and I thought that was really kind of fit with this slide. It's really asking yourself questions, wanting to improve. So kind of my research path has been, this is the kind of the educational part, and I think this is a very small bit into what has made me a researcher. So as mentioned, I went to undergrad at Northwestern from Birmingham, Alabama, and I started pre-med thinking I wanted to be an obstetrician, and I realized after I take my first few organic chemistry classes that maybe this wasn't for me, but I did find that I love things. We had a really strong African American Studies program, and I took a lot of literature classes. I loved to read as a kid, and so this was a really great fit. And then I also started taking some psychology classes, and I realized that what I really liked about medicine was that trying to fix some human problem. So I didn't know about public health at the time. And so I really wanted people to be able to have the skills to make their lives better. And so I thought medicine was the reason, but as I learned about psychology, I was like, oh, this is really what I'm interested in, and understanding how people behave and how people make decisions. And then fast forward a year or so after I graduated from undergrad, I went to Emory. At this point, I learned about public health and focused in behavioral science and health education. And then a couple years after that, I started at UNC in their health behavior program. And so all of this is just a framework for the research. It kind of gave me the structure, but it also provided me the milestones, which is this slide. So the basis of my research experience have been, the first research project I was on was basically luck. I just reached out to, I didn't know what I was going to do with the psychology degree, and it was during the recession. So I was like, well, I just need a job, and I wasn't sure what the next step was going to be. But I ended up getting a position as a research assistant in for a grant that was focused on substance use among formerly incarcerated individuals. And I thought, okay, substance use, that's what I really am interested in. And so when I applied to graduate school, I wanted to focus on substance use prevention. But I got a research assistantship while I was in grad school, working with a qualitative study of women with incarcerated partners. And so I got that position because I had formerly worked with people who were formerly incarcerated. And then I realized it's one of my favorite studies I've ever worked on, because it was a qualitative study of talking with women in Atlanta whose partner was incarcerated, understanding the emotional, financial, and stressful tolls associated with having an incarcerated partner. So I think through this experience, I learned a little bit more I like this justice-involved background. And then between my first and second year in college, graduate school, I had an internship with the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene in their substance use and population health. And there I learned I'm not as interested in substance use as I thought it was. And I also am not interested in working for the government. So it was a really helpful internship to learn what I don't like. And it was a great experience, but it really helped me refine what I was interested in. A couple months after my internship, I was at a conference. The American Public Health Association conference is huge, and one of the things they do have is an expo, and they have tons of jobs and organizations. And one of the organizations I went to was RTI International, and I talked to the recruiter there, and he mentioned that there was a division that had a lot of things that was interesting to me, particularly incarceration, effects of incarceration on families, substance use. And I kept an eye on positions there, and sure enough, a month before I was graduating, they had a position in their crime, violence, and justice program. It's been renamed about 3 or 4 times since then. And I got the position. I started this September after I graduated. And since I've been at RTI, I've been there for 6 years now. It's just been a great experience. It's a not-for-profit organization. It's not academic or government, even though we mostly work for government contracts, and is really modeled after the academic research structure. I've worked on such a variety of projects. No 2 projects have been the same. I've worked on some that have a mix of homelessness, mental health, substance use. I've even recently worked on a project about medical examiners and coroners operations. I have no experience about that, but it was just, I had a skill set, I was able to help out, and now I know about the U.S. systems of medical examiners and prison reentry. So that is an interest of mine in this division that's focused on criminal justice. So working and looking at outcomes related to services provided to people as they're releasing from prison. But then after a few years at RTI, I realized that I really was interested in violence prevention and violence research. I hadn't worked on it before, and for some reason, this is where I wanted to focus. And so when I applied to grad school, I made sure to focus on increasing my knowledge in violence prevention and violence research overall. And I've been pretty successful the past 3 years. I work on a sexual violence prevention study as a research assistant. We actually do a lot of work in Greensboro with the Boys and Girls Club, and I've really learned about what does it mean to develop an intervention related to sexual violence. I also work on a domestic violence protective order study, and I'm also a fellow with the Injury Prevention Center at UNC. So I say all that just because this educational situations, they keep providing me the opportunities, but it's really been the research opportunities that have really shaped my career and my progress as a researcher. So postgraduate, once I finish my dissertation, likely is going to stay at RTI. I really love it there, and I love the diversity in the projects that they have there. But the main thing I wanted to, as a takeaway is that as this is an interdisciplinary research day, and I think as you all know that there are a lot of systems at play when we're talking about health behavior. So as I mentioned, one thing I liked about public health was that you can get to the root of how people make decisions. And I think one thing, and I continuously fall in love with public health because it addressed so many root causes that a lot of areas are afraid to talk about. For instance, violence has been typically, violence in criminal justice system has been usually talked about as a public safety issue. But public health recently with the CDC have really started to take on those issues as a public health issues and think about what kind of factors early in life are impacting violence outcomes and incarceration, and what's the impact of violence and incarceration on other people's lives and their own lives later on. So this is one framework. How many people are familiar with social determinants of health? Okay. This is a very popular framework in public health, and this is basically that your health is not just your health. So if you are, you say like 30, let's say 100 pounds overweight, it's not just because you have no willpower or, you know, some of these ways we think about individual behaviors. But there's a lot of things in your environment that is shaping how you are, including your neighborhoods. How close are you to fresh vegetables and fruit? How easy is it to walk around your community? How safe is it to walk around your community? Also, money to purchase like these vegetables in your family. What are the norms about the types of food you eat and about exercising and restricting yourself to like cutting out sugar and things like that? And then of course, healthcare and healthcare access. So this is just one of the frameworks, and I just wanted to highlight this because this is a very big interdisciplinary. It incorporates a lot of different research, sociology, even when you get into the more criminal justice, a lot of forensic psychology and criminology perspectives, nutrition. It just allows for a lot of thinking about how can you solve problems beyond just looking at that one health condition. And this is an example. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but this is a way people have used, applied like a social determinants of health framework to criminal justice, which is the sum of this is basically your community conditions can impact your health, your health behaviors. Your behaviors can also affect your community. So if you commit a crime, it changes the way the neighborhood thinks about itself, the safety, the way it thinks about its safety. And that can change, you know, who's being incarcerated, the policies around the criminal justice policies, and then that can change your physical health outcome. There was a study that came out a few years ago that said that people who've been incarcerated have poorer health before, during, and after poorer health than those who have never been incarcerated. And what stood out to me is before, the part before. So that means that people who were incarcerated, before they actually were incarcerated, so if they were incarcerated, two people were like 25 years old, the person who's been incarcerated by 25 probably had poorer health at 17 than the person also at 17 who were never incarcerated. So that tells me that there's a relationship between health and incarceration that we really need to look at. What's going on in somebody's life that's leading them to incarceration? And then it's pretty much widespread that once you leave, once you're in the system, your mental and physical health outcomes are worsened. So I'm also interested, as I mentioned, in violence research. So this is just some of the ways that I've looked at some of the violence research out there. There's a lot, but there's a lot of opportunities to kind of dig in deeper. So one is just the general prevalence. So we see that 19% of women and 1.7% of men have been raped in their lifetime. 22% of women have been victims of severe physical violence by their partners. So we still have a lot to grow for the areas of sexual violence and intimate partner violence. And what really inspires me is to think about the health disparities. So Black women and non-racial women, multiracial women, are at higher risk for intimate partner violence than white women. But I don't know about you, but I don't hear a lot about that in our community. And I think that there's a lot of norms that silence it or doesn't recognize it. But it also is another statistic that for homicides for women, more Black women and Indian women are at risk for
being murdered by their intimate partner or a former intimate partner than white women. So we really need to address this. So in addition to addressing general violence in our community or intimate partner violence, sexual violence, we also need to look at who is being most affected and what is being done to address it. And then another piece I've recently started to look at is adverse childhood experiences. And I think there was one of the presentations earlier that talked about kind of these early experiences in life, such as being victims, being a victim of child abuse, being maltreated, having a parent who is incarcerated can have monumental effects on your life later on, and including a repeat exposure to violence, either being a victim of violence or a perpetrator of violence. And so this is a field where we know the link between these early experiences, but we're still trying to understand why. Which kind of gets me to my dissertation research question. So I'm interested in looking at how these early childhood experiences, such as child sexual assault, maltreatment, parental incarceration, impacts your violent outcomes in adulthood. So looking at perpetration and victimization. But then from my own personal experience, I grew up in a single parent home. We moved around a lot. And as I talk to people, they're also like, well, how did you make it to where you are? And I think I just always had a very strong support system. I was from a loving family, and I had teachers who always were there for me. They encouraged me to read. I remember a 7th grade teacher who introduced me to Harry Potter. She lent me 2 copies of it. And when I went to Northwestern, even though it's predominantly white school with a very small black population, the black population, we stuck together. And I think about it completely fondly. I don't have any really negative experiences because of that community. So I wonder how much can those social cohesion at this transition period from an adolescent to young adulthood, how impactful is that, and how can it buffer those violent outcomes later in life? So these are just some general kind of current and future research interests I have, related to violence, sexual violence, polyvictimization, and also just the impacts of the justice system. So the histories of those who are incarcerated, a lot of the people who are incarcerated have very extensive trauma histories, and thinking about how can we intervene. How can we talk about the impact, the collateral consequences of incarceration on families? And then thinking about the disparities in the justice systems through the process of being arrested, going through the court systems, incarceration, and release, who are getting the alternative services. There's a lot of this going on with prison reform right now, but we really need to keep an eye on who's getting the services and who are not. And then also what training or interventions are needed to reduce these disparities. Because one thing I want to note is the people who are identifying the problems are not always the people who are creating interventions. You would think that they're talking to each other, but they're really not. So just some kind of last pieces for those who are going to a career in research. I think first and foremost, it's just important to maintain balance. So don't always believe that you have to stick to the peer-reviewed articles, the data that's out there. You can use your own personal sense to navigate, how do you craft a question? Because if the question is in the data, we wouldn't be here. You have to use your own personal sense to help drive it, but don't let it overcome what's the theory, what's the data showing. Also, go for your passion. Don't go for something that's just marketable, because those things change, but research is long. It takes forever to make changes, so you really need to feel strongly about whatever you're interested in, but don't let it become all of your life. There's a point where I can no longer read violence and criminal justice read at night. I'm not going to do it because it's too much. So it's creating a barrier in the work you're doing. Also, again, just you're not superhuman. You don't have to solve all the world problems. Just make sure the work you're doing is good and quality and people can't question it. People will question it, but you don't want all the work that you're doing to get discredited because of some sloppy mistake. And then I guess my main thing is rejection happens. It's okay. So you have 2 choices, at least my opinion. You can either learn from it and improve or wallow in it. There's a third option, which is to keep making the same mistakes over and over again, but I won't even acknowledge that. And then my last is just having a great mentor, having multiple mentors, and appreciating people at all levels. So your peers are really great resources. Even though they don't have the degrees or so behind their names, they are really great people to talk to and be inspired by the work that they're doing. Also talk to people who are 3 or 4 years away from where you want to be, because they can be a lot of great resources for thinking about, funding opportunities and how to talk to, other professors or people who kind of have that more powerful spot. So they can be a really great avenue for you to get in. And then just keep in touch with people. So if you're an undergrad, you may not be thinking about letters of recommendations, but those are really crucial to get in. So making sure you're established that before you leave, and then keep in contact. I think people love to hear that the ways that they have been influential for you, and then they would love to, especially at least in my experience, love to pay it back and continue to see you grow. So as long as you cultivate those relationships, people are usually very happy to see you succeed as well. So that's it for me, and I'm happy to answer any more questions. You can contact me at, this is one of my many different email addresses. Also have a LinkedIn, you can find me on that. So thank you. Any questions? Most of the work we do are contracts. So we do a lot of proposals and working with federal or state agencies. In my area, which is the applied justice research, we work with NIJ, the National Institute for Justice, and things like that frequently. Is that answering the question? Usually there's it's, I think, at least similar to my experience with academia. You have a PI, and they assemble their research team, and so maybe about 5 or 6 people per team. Definitely in our area, in the Applied Justice Division I'm in, we don't really focus on health disparity. That's my new charge, kind of coming in as a student, as kind of more powered from my doctoral training, is that, I say we make a lot of money off of incarceration. We have tons of projects that are coming in, but we don't do any health disparities work. And using that background in African American studies and my own personal history, I think we really just need to have a focus there. Also, all the different projects I've worked on, although they've been varied at RTI, they really helped me better disseminate. So I do a lot of products that's for lay audiences, for public, general audiences. And so I've kind of already broken the habit of talking just in academic jargon. So making sure that people of all levels can understand and appreciate the work, not creating massive reports, but something as much as a fact sheet or a brief that people can just quickly read, can just really help to disseminate the results much better than a very lengthy report that most people will just kind of run their door as a doorstop.
One thing, thanks so much for your talk today. One thing that was great about your talk is it tied together a lot of the research that we heard today, in terms of some of the stuff Destiny you were just talking about, some of the research we heard on prisons in the morning, and just overall it was a great way to tie things in. So. And if it's all right with you, we would like to use your talk on our radio station, which is on Sirius XM, and it will go out to the nation in the next coming weeks, so we'll be able to kind of spread your word that way. Now, I want to thank all of you for coming out. So we need you to tell your friends who were here earlier, meet us over at the gallery. We're going to have awards. We
get a chance to talk to our keynote speaker and talk over some of the programs earlier in the day. Ms. Baker Whitaker, do you have any final thoughts? Thank you. By staying in here, you don't have to walk through the Lens City. I understand the weather is cleared up, and it'll be a clear path. And we'll see all of you then. Thank you for coming.